Gumba Daru, Gumba Ninigia Nindu, which is good day, it's good to see you, in Barragum, which is the traditional language of the community that I grew up on the Darling Downs in Queensland. And 2019 is the International Year of Indigenous Languages. And here at State Library, each staff member is adopting some words from the community that they grew up or they have an association with. So good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Vicky Mcdonald, and it's my great privilege to be the State Librarian and CEO here at the State Library of Queensland. And on behalf of my colleagues, I welcome you to the second Game Changers event for 2019. I also extend a welcome to those who are watching via the live stream tonight. Let me also begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and pay respects to their ancestors who came before them. The location of State Library on Kirilpa Point is a traditional meeting, gathering and sharing place for Aboriginal people, and we proudly continue that tradition here today, tonight and every day of the year. I'd also like to acknowledge and welcome our speaker for tonight, Dr Kirstin Ferguson, Deputy Chair of the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, our facilitator, Ray Weeks, Chairman of the CEO Institute, Helen Brodie, President of the Queensland Library Foundation, Rabina Xavier, Executive Dean, QUT Business School, members of the Library Board of Queensland, the Queensland Library Foundation Council, QUT Business School, and the Queensland Business Leaders Hall of Fame Governing Committee. I also extend a very warm welcome to our generous donors and partners, Pitcher Partners, Channel 7, Morgans, NAB and RACQ. And of course, to our friends and supporters of the State Library of Queensland, welcome. And thank you for joining us for the second Game Changers conversation event for 2019. So Kirstin, I think you have pulled the biggest crowd for the last couple of years, so well done. It's fantastic to see our auditorium full and also to know that people are watching us on the live stream tonight as well. So this event brings together innovative leaders from business, technology and creative industries to share their experiences and encourage us to think bigger and better. The Game Changers series is an initiative of the Queensland Business Leaders Hall of Fame. It was established in 2009 by the State Library, Queensland Library Foundation and the QUT Business School. The Hall of Fame celebrates, records and retells stories of Queensland's outstanding business leaders and their many contributions to the development of our state. Perhaps some of you here tonight are interested in developing your own leadership ambitions or to learn more about new approaches to business. Many of you come along to network and to build new connections. Or maybe you're here because you want to change the world. At State Library, we want to inspire possibilities through knowledge, stories and creativity. I always feel encouraged after hearing stories and personal reflections from those dedicated Queensland leaders. I'm always inspired and motivated by women who have forged impressive careers in a society that in a lot of cases has presented an additional set of challenges for females. So I'm particularly looking forward to hearing more from Kirstin, particularly around her Celebrating Women's Social campaign. Over the years, we've hosted 24 Game Changers conversations with leaders who've shared the highs, the lows, and learnings from their time in business. You can watch recordings of those conversations on State Library's newly designed website, plus also access a range of business resources for free. Your free State Library membership, you can complete business courses and tutorials or develop skills through the online learning platform lynda.com. While you're here tonight at State Library, you might also like to check out our latest showcase in Kurraldargan on level 1 called I Heard It on the Radio, 25 Years of 98.9 FM Country. And we're open until 8 p.m. tonight, so you will have some time to check it out or come back on the weekend. The showcase in Kurraldargan tracks the story of the first Indigenous radio station in an Australian capital city, and it was started by a passionate and pioneering group of community members who fought for change. The story is certainly another example of game-changing leadership in Queensland. If you're watching tonight via the live stream, you can tweet via your questions using the hashtag QBLHOF, and please add your location so we know where you're actually watching us from. Audience members are also free to tweet their questions, or you can hold on to them for the Q&A session at the end of the conversation. But for now, could you please welcome Ray Weeks to the stage, and Ray will introduce Kirstin and begin tonight's conversation. Thank you.
Thanks, Vicky. Good evening, and I tell you what, it's just great to look out and see this place just filled to the brim. So, Kirstin, you've done a spectacular job attracting these numbers. Dr Kirstin Ferguson has this remarkable personal story of leadership, achievement, and changing the game. Kirstin is Deputy Chair of the ABC, as you've heard from Vicky, and is on a number of listed and unlisted boards. She was the first female director of the Queensland Rugby Union, and is an adjunct professor in the QUT Business School. She began her career, and we'll explore some of this in the Q&A, by studying at the Australian Defence Force Academy in Canberra while training to be an officer in the Royal Australian Air Force, and she was Dux of the Air Force graduating class. I should say it was where Kirstin met her husband Glenn, who's right here tonight, an F-111 pilot. This is straight out of Top Gun, I've got to tell you. Straight out. And it's wonderful that Glenn is here tonight, and also daughter Zoe, so we welcome you both. Kirstin created, as you've heard, this online campaign, #celebrating women, with these uplifting stories from women that deeply touched so many people. Out of this, her book Womankind came about, a book that unlocks the power of women. It's about women finding their voice and celebrating other women's stories. It has enabled women to put their experiences front and centre. It's about women helping each other to thrive, and describes how women are making their efforts and their lives more visible. So Womankind examines how women's shared clout is transforming communities, workplaces and leadership. It celebrates the power of women supporting women. Look, I just want to, before we get on, I just want to share a story with you, which I was talking to Kirstin yesterday about. Let me share a story with you about my mother. My mother was my great inspiration and gave me the understanding of the power of education. My mother was a senior executive in a major listed public company when women were not expected to be senior executives. And she used to say you had to be twice as good as the average man to succeed, and she'd say, thank Christ that's not difficult. So Kirstin went on to become CEO of a successful global consulting business and has been named one of Australia's 100 Women of Influence. And is a Sir Winston Churchill Fellow and was recognised by Women in Leadership in Australia with an award for excellence in women's leadership. It's a fascinating leadership journey to date. And as a game changer, Kirstin has approached business leadership in a way that does challenge the norms and does celebrate diversity. So please welcome Kirstin Ferguson.
Thank you. Given my daughter's here, it's the G-rated version of Top Gun, by the way.
Is that right? Kirstin, let's just start off. What do you know about yourself now that you didn't know about yourself in those very early days?
Well, there's a very long list that I'm still learning, I guess, about myself. But one of the things I have learned is that I'm a true optimist by nature. I'm just naturally optimistic. But I think I've learned over time that you have to balance that with reality. And that's come at some hard lessons along the way, because I'm naturally very trusting and you assume everyone's got the same sort of optimism. I don't know if you've heard of the story of James Stockdale, who was in a prisoner of war during the Vietnam War, and the Stockdale paradox. And he talked about how in the prisoner of war camp, the people who generally died were the optimists, and you hear that and think, well, how can that be the case? And of course they were the people who were saying, I'm going to be out by Christmas, I just know it. And of course they're still there at Christmas comes, and then the next Christmas, and they end up losing all hope. And what he talks about is having that sense of optimism and a sureness of your success, but balancing that with the brutal facts, the reality of your situation, and weighing that up. And I think that's something that I've really come to learn about myself. Not always brilliantly, that's for sure, and sometimes I'll forget, but it's something that I'm working hard on.
And optimism in the face of reality, really understanding the reality you're dealing with.
Because you don't want to lose that optimism.
No, true.
I mean, I think it's something that's a real positive, but you do have to balance it because you have really tough times. I've had plenty of really challenging issues to have to deal with, and it's balancing that sense of the brutal facts. It is actually a pretty tough time you're going through, but having a sureness that you're going to get through it on
Good.
the other side.
And not slipping into self-denial.
Trying. Yeah.
And it's interesting you say that about the view of optimism, because you come up with Colin Powell, head of the US Army. His book, A Soldier's Story, one of his leadership lessons is optimism is a force multiplier, which is what you firmly believe in. You joined the military at a very young age, 17 years old, to become an RAAF officer, and you started your career as a cadet at the Australian Defence Force Academy. Now, how did the experiences in the RAAF as a young woman shape who you are today?
Yeah, look, I think it was the foundation for everything, really. It taught me a lot about leadership. It taught me a lot about resilience, about going through really, really difficult times. I was at the academy in the early 90s, which is now the period of investigations and government reports and inquiries, and it was a pretty shocking time for women. There were very few women there. I was really fortunate that I had a relatively positive experience and really enjoyed my time there. But for a lot of that, it was because I sought to just fit in and try and hope no one actually noticed I was a woman at all. And because I did well, and I did well, and that really reinforced for me that that's how you get on. So if you're in a male-dominated environment, you just fit in as best you can to the culture that you're working in. And I think that stayed with me for a long time, and I know we'll talk about celebrating women, but for 20 years I would run from any women's event for fear of being seen as one of those difficult women who, God forbid, might, ask to be paid the same as men. I loved your mother's anecdote, but I'd say twice as good to be paid half as much. I'd add that little bit.
That's right.
So I think being there, that was one of the things that I've carried with me. But in terms of leadership, the military is often seen as perhaps teaching autocratic leadership, or it's just what you see in movies of yelling and screaming. And in fact, it's not that at all. And it teaches you about needing to earn the respect of your men and women, and that they will not follow you up and over into battle and put their lives at risk unless they trust you. And that's something that becomes just an innate part of how you lead, and you need a lot of emotional intelligence to be a good military leader, as well as all of the other intellectual things that we need to be leaders. You need those soft skills as well.
You'd support the Peter Cosgrove view of leadership, which is, he said that the military forces, the individuals, had a very simple test of good leadership in the military, which was, do they know me? Do they care? Am I important to them? Do you support?
Oh, of course, and you could apply that to everyone. And I think every leader should be asking themselves that question, and they might be a bit scared at the answers.
Exactly. Was there someone in the early part of your career that saw something in you that you didn't see in yourself, gave you a confidence about what you could deliver?
Yeah, and it's still today. I think any time I'm offered an opportunity, I think, gosh, someone's seen something that, I might not have seen in myself. And that's part of this imposter syndrome that we all have. I certainly have on a daily basis. I'm better now at sort of hearing that voice and ignoring it. But early in my career, I had mentors and supervisors and bosses who, would say encouraging things or make me feel that I could actually achieve what I wanted to achieve. And that was so powerful, and it's a reminder now that we need to be doing that a lot more, and making sure that we're always paying that forward and giving people the encouragement they need. Because if you don't trust yourself, which most of us don't, a lot of us question, whether or not we're capable of doing whatever that next opportunity is. I think it's much easier to trust that someone else has seen something in you and to follow them.
So tell us a bit more about how you struggled with that imposter syndrome, and how you handled that, how you dealt with it.
Yeah, well, I'm still, I think all of us, it's easy to look from the outside at someone's career or achievements or the number of degrees they've got or whatever their little bio might say, and think, oh, they've obviously got it all together. But I can assure you every single one of us in this room would have some level of imposter syndrome. And all that is meaning that you question whether or not you're good enough or whether or not you know enough. I think women particularly, men and women struggle with it, but women in particular will feel we need to have every qualification before we take on a new role or a new opportunity. And it's hearing that voice, my peak imposter syndrome moment, which is totally ridiculous, but it highlights how ingrained it is. I had done a PhD, and when you do that, you become the expert in a very, very, very minor little piece of knowledge in the world. And there really was no one else who knew more about my topic than me, and I was asked to speak at a conference on it. And my very first thought was, I'm sure there's someone else who'll know more about it. Now, that's just absolutely ridiculous, and I can ignore that now. But it's how it plays into your mind, I think, about having that self-confidence always. And the more you do it and the more you don't fail, the more you look back and think, what could possibly go wrong?
Now, as we all know, you were appointed acting chair of the ABC board very suddenly, very publicly, and in tumultuous circumstances. And I understand you can't talk tonight about any of the specifics of what was involved, and tonight you're not talking in any official capacity on behalf of the ABC, but many leaders wonder how they might deal with being put in that position. And you never really know how you might handle it until it actually happens. So, Kirstin, tell us, what did you learn about yourself as a leader through that period, and what lessons are there for anyone else who may find themselves having to lead through a crisis like that?
You definitely cannot prepare yourself, for that kind of circumstance. And I think I've had time now to reflect on what it was all, what it meant for me, I guess, in terms of my own leadership. Because when you're in it, obviously I didn't have time to think through any of that. What I did learn is I'm exceedingly calm in a crisis. If you need someone in a crisis, I'm pretty calm. I think it became I was so focused on, that's what was needed, was publicly and in working through issues to be calm. And it doesn't mean I was privately. So privately, there's a huge amount of pressure that you're dealing with. But publicly, while I was working, I was very calm. I think I discovered that when you're under that much pressure, and others might have experienced this, your world becomes quite small. It feels quite small. It's hard to describe, but there's not enough time to actually think through how you might have strategized a particular crisis, or a new thing might come along quite quickly, or you need to respond to something almost instantly. And so everything feels very pressurized, obviously, but it feels quite small, and the number of people wanting to give you advice is endless, and you actually need to really narrow that down and trust a smaller number and seek that advice from others when you need to. But it's impossible to obviously digest all of the advice good-meaning people will pass on. I think the other thing was really bite-sized chunks. When you've got a lot of issues to deal with, and this definitely came from my military training. I remember when I was in my 3rd year at ADFA, we used to have to do a thing called cryptic challenge, where it was like a leadership exercise out in the bush, and you weren't given much food, and you had to carry a pack around and climb up mountains and all of that sort of thing. And they would test you out, and you would be assessed on your leadership. Anyway, I was given sort of the back end of the period where everyone was tired and hungry, and we had this big mountain to climb up. And I remember when I was leading that particular section, this mountain was enormous, and if you sit at the bottom, it was a bit like what I was going through. If you think about everything you've got to work through, it's overwhelming. But we did just bite-sized chunks, and every 50 metres, 100 metres, we'd identify a tree and get to it, and then we'd all feel like we'd succeeded. I think, obviously, very different analogy, but breaking various issues down into bite-sized chunks makes everything much more achievable, even when it seems insurmountable. And that was something that was incredibly helpful. So for people who are in a crisis, I think it's trying to cut out the noise and really narrow down to what you need to deal with in that moment right then, and park the other things, which could be on their own massive, but they're not the priority then and there. And then the last thing is, ultimately, you're the leader, and you'll get conflicting advice from all sorts of quarters. In the end, you really need to trust your own view on what needs to happen and act on that.
And how important it is to maintain that composure under pressure, as you say.
Yeah, well, I've never been on television before, and my first experience was a 20-minute live interview. So that certainly tested, and I was very calm. But the old adage, you walk in and they tell you your mind will go blank. Well, that happened as I walked to the desk. But luckily, I think if you're trained as a leader, you're there when you need to be there. Yeah.
Look, you created this remarkable online campaign, #CelebratingWomen, with uplifting stories from women. Now, tell us how your views about women's lives have changed as a result of your book, Womankind, and what impact the book has had, and how can women better support each other?
That's a big question.
Huge.
Well, let me go back. So the campaign came about and became much bigger than I ever planned, ever intended, and I was on holidays thinking, oh, I'll just do this little thing. And it became a year-long sort of, I nearly said ordeal. It was a wonderful challenge, but it was a huge amount that I took on without realising, and it was the most rewarding year I've ever had. But basically it came about because if you're on social media, and I love social media, if people here are on social, please find me. I love connecting with it. I think all leaders should be active on social media. But you can't help but notice the denigration that women face for being online. And on this particular day while I was on holidays, I noticed a thread of tweets abusing one of the ABC's female broadcasters. And I remember thinking, had I been standing next to her, you know, I would have said something. I would have called the police in some occasions, but I certainly would have done something. And I could have chosen to be a bystander or try and do something. And I wanted to, again, being the optimist, try and make my news feed a bit more positive. And so came up with this idea of wanting to celebrate women. And the very first person I celebrated was my mother, and I asked her 4 questions, posted some photos, that was it. But it sort of took off, and in the end I made a very bold public commitment to see if I could celebrate 2 women every single day of 2017 it was, and in the end celebrated 757 women from 37 countries, which is what I mean. It got a bit bigger than I thought. Thank you.
That's great. That's great.
So that's sort of the scale of what I was dealing with. What I learnt was, firstly, every woman will tell you they haven't done anything worth celebrating. And I got so overhearing that I didn't even let them finish the sentence. And I'm like, yeah, fill in the form and just let me celebrate you. But it also taught me about diversity and inclusion. So there was no qualifying criteria. It was any woman. And in fact, I celebrated transgender women. You just had to identify as a woman. Any educational background, any role, there was nothing, because
no criteria.
There was no criteria, because I truly believe that every single woman is a role model, and many don't realise it, but every woman is. There was a cleaner I celebrated who lived in Cairns, I think. She had a little small business and she was cleaning motels, but she was a role model to other women who may want to change their circumstances and have a small business. So what I learnt was we need to, all of us who want diverse workplaces, I think the strategy has to be inclusion. So because it was such an inclusive campaign and there was no barriers to entry, every woman felt able to be involved, and from that diversity followed. And so that was the real richness of it, and I think for us as leaders as well.
But you cut it at the end of December 31.
I could not keep doing it.
It
was
was yeah.
and it was important to hand on, I think, to other. And there's now all these spin-off campaigns. There's a Celebrating Women in Japan, and there's Celebrating Women in various industries. And I mean, it's wonderful. That's exactly what we should do, because I don't know if you've heard the saying that says, you know, if you should be so lucky to achieve your own goals, you should throw down the ladder for people behind you. Well, I really believe we need to forget the bloody ladder. The ladder is a hopeless analogy, because if you think about it, firstly, you're holding on for dear life, only one person at a time, and no one can get past. So what Celebrating Women taught me is we can throw down a fishing net and bring up many, many women together, and we can all hold the sides and do that.
Now, you asked 4 questions of each woman in your book. These are great questions, but I'm going to ask you 2 of those questions. Describe your life. This is one of the 4 questions. Describe your life using only 3 words, and who did you hope to inspire?
And why?
And
That's
why?
The end of that question. I know those 4 questions pretty well, and they were made up on the beach having drunk a beer on my way back on holidays. 3 words would be loved. I've had a loved life. I am loved and love others. Eventful, there's never a dull moment, and rewarding. It's been a really rewarding life, and hope it continues to be. Who I hope to inspire are certainly other women, men and leaders generally, but women in particular. But, you know, I've got 2 teenage daughters, one who's here tonight, who's 17, the other who's 19, who's, I think, watching on the live stream and had a big calculus exam today. So if you're watching, Emily, I hope that went well. But obviously, you know, I want to inspire them to feel that they can do whatever they can do.
Now, this is also about using your privilege to serve other people, isn't it? That's a word that's very important to you, isn't it?
It is. I think servant leadership or humble leadership is incredibly important. And everything we're talking about is because I'm coming from a position of privilege. We are all privileged to be sitting here, educated, fed, able to go home, hopefully to a safe environment. And that's something I'm really conscious of through my career. I've been very fortunate to have lots of education and the ability to swap and change careers, which has been wonderful. But so many women are not in that position, and I think we all need to remember that and to be giving back and making those opportunities for others who can't be so fortunate.
Now, in terms of giving back, you've got to tell us about your grandmother, Millie, and how much of her spirit, your grandmother, Millie, how much of her spirit do you have?
Yeah, a fair bit. She also gave me the curly, frizzy hair, so that's from Millie.
So tell us about Millie.
Millie was my grandmother, and she married he was an army officer and a major general. He became a major general in the army, and he liked to have his lunch, at 12 o'clock, and they would have sherries and nibbles or whatever at 5 and 6. Anyway, it was very regimented. And she only got her licence quite late in life. It might have been 60 or 70. Anyway, when he passed away, she had this little Honda Civic, I think it was at the time, a Honda Jazz or a Honda Civic, not a big car. And it was bright yellow, and she lived on the Mornington Peninsula, and she decided that she was going to go driving, but she wanted to do what she called the long circuit, which was right around Australia, which is, 17,000 kilometres or something. Oh no, just wait. So she did a lap around Australia, and everyone was sort of very humouring her, and yes, that's great, Millie. And Millie stands for mother-in-law, by the way, which one of the son-in-laws named her. And she got back and wanted to see it from the other direction. So, no, still just wait. So she did it in the other direction, and we're all thinking, okay, this is now quite curious, but she was loving it. And she would eat baked beans out of cans in dodgy motels all around Australia, and she had a flagon of sherry in her boot. And she would assure me that never until 5 o'clock could she have and only one glass of sherry. Anyway, this continued. So she did 2 trips. She gets back, and there's other little grannies wanting to go with her, and she's saying, no, I don't travel with anyone. I go on my own. And she loved the solitude. She did it 17 times.
What?
17 times. Channel 7 Sunrise named a Winnebago after her. And I'm in the hairdresser one day and opened, new idea, and there's my grandmother next to this Winnebago called Millie, the weather van.
And what about the truck drivers? What do they know?
So the truck drivers used to get to know her. She was obviously there frequently. And she got a CB, and her call sign was the Galloping Granny. And when she went to all these pubs, which were pretty, these are rough pubs, she loved it, and they all looked after her, except she told me some guy propositioned her, which I was a little concerned with, because at this point she's sort of 85, 90, but they would put bumper stickers on the back of her car, and one said, I got pissed at the wherever pub, and that was her proudest thing. So she was absolutely remarkable. So she lived to 93. She wrote a book about it called Baked Beans in the Desert and Curry in Kashmir, and she was amazing. And so if I've even got some of her spirit, but the way her death was also lovely, and I know it's, you don't often say that, but I got to say, we sort of knew she was getting on, and she moved herself, by the way, at 90 to Clare without sort of telling the family, just got a removal, and off she went and lived in this beautiful part of Clare, which was, because she wanted to do that. It was wonderful. But I went and visited her, and she died maybe a few months later, but she took herself off to the local hospital and said, I think I need to lay down, and that was it. It was a beautiful life. So
at what age?
93.
93.
Yeah. So I think I do have a lot of her spirit, and she's phenomenal.
Let's talk about great places to work for a moment. We talk about diversity, authenticity, mutual respect. These seem to be characteristics that you believe in for a great place to work. Is that
Yeah, I think if you can't respect other people, and you can't feel you're yourself, and you can't work in a place where you're, really including different views, then, what's it all about? I'm a real believer that as a leader, I think it's easy, and I say that in inverted commas because I know it's not, but to have the intellect to be a leader. You can learn it. And, there's things I've learnt about being a technical leader, working in an industry or understanding how to read P&Ls and balance sheets and all of that sort of thing. But far more challenging, but the most important is having the emotional intelligence as a leader. And I think if you can combine those two, you'll always be streets ahead of the leader who's just got the smarts but has no idea how to actually talk to people or treat people with respect. And so that's why I think those values are just so important for any leader.
Vulnerability?
Definitely.
It's a key part of leadership, isn't it, to demonstrate vulnerability at the right time?
Yeah, and saying, I actually don't know the answer to this. You know, there's been challenges I've had to deal with, and having a team and you say, I don't really know how we're going to overcome this challenge, but I know together we will, because you guys have all got the skills, or we're each going to have a part that we can contribute. And as the leader, you're just the conductor, bringing all of that together and helping others be their best. You don't need to be the one solving everything.
Let's just keep going with a bit more of the leadership attributes that truly matter to you. But in doing that, tell us about the leadership skills you gained by being a burials officer in the Air Force. And to describe that role.
I've had some curious careers.
Describe the role and what are some of the leadership skills?
When you're in the military, you often get secondary duties, and it's my main role when I graduated from ADFA and I was posted to Amberley, and that's where the Top Gun cliche comes out. Second day, I meet my husband who's wearing the flying suit. It's very handsome. I was single and 21 and posted to an F-111 squadron, so it doesn't get much better. But on that first day, I turn up for what I think is my main job, which is as an administration officer, and I was told, there's a bunch of secondary duties, and this is the one you're getting, you're the burials officer. And I'd never been to a funeral at this point, I was 21. And not only that, someone's died and the chaplain's coming to get you, and you need to go and sit in their the parents' living room. So on my very first day, I was in the living room of this family whose son had died, just thinking, where the hell am I? What on earth is going on? And I ended up running about 15 funerals over my period, and it was such a rewarding thing that I did, because you learn about empathy, you learn about how you can help people in their worst moments of grief. There were some pretty curious things that happened as well. A family whose son had very tragically suicided, but he'd done so under a train, and so yes, it became a very difficult matter to when they wanted to have a viewing, and how you explain that might not be, and you've really got to be able to communicate with empathy and understand and help that family through things. And the chaplains, I'm not a religious person at all, but there was 3 from each of the main Christian religions that would come along, and observing them and how they spoke to people who often weren't religious themselves through those times, I think just gives you that empathy that carries on, and so it was quite an interesting way to start my RAF career.
Now look, there's a number of people here I know that are looking to move on to board roles and so on, but first question is, why did you pursue a professional company director career and not other full-time executive roles? Yeah,
it's interesting because I was really very young to be offered my first board role at 35, and I'm now 46, so I've been doing it for a long time. But when I was on my first board, I was also a CEO, and so I was doing both roles for a while, and then got asked to join a second board, and that's when I decided to see if I might pursue it full time. And so it's one of those things, I say yes to opportunities. I'm really, you never know where life will lead you, and I still wonder now, what would I have done had I not done it? But I've got no regrets, because what I hadn't realised is how much I like the diversity of being on different boards and doing different things. And in any one week, I could be doing something I had no idea was going to happen the week before. And while I loved working in single organisations, you're very much within that industry or that context or that business. So who knows what will happen in the future, but I'm certainly loving doing what I'm doing now.
Because a portfolio career does give you that flexibility, doesn't it? It gives you the choice. You can pick and choose the people you want to work with.
Yeah.
And it's
again, if you've got the privilege to have that those opportunities, but yes, you do. And that's what I love, because I've got 4 full-time or 4 corporate board roles, but between that I can do other things that I love putting my hand in, and writing books or doing social media campaigns or whatever it might be. but I certainly love the board work, and treat corporate governance is sort of a passion and something you've got to be really focused on and want to see done very well.
So from your experiences, what are the best ways to get onto boards?
Yeah, that's $1 million question I'm often asked. Look, there's no magic to it. There's a lot of pounding the pavement and actually networking and getting to know other directors and joining organisations like the Australian Institute of Company Directors and going and doing their course. And I think being very well read about what's going on across industries, different industries, really understanding what it is you will add to a board role. So I think that's something that a lot of new executives can't articulate very well. They might say, well, I'm very good at, turnarounds, but that's not exact unless you can articulate exactly how you're going to apply that in a board sense. It's difficult to understand sort of what you'll bring to a board. So I think really thinking about what it is you'll do when you're not the hands-on is one of the first key steps for
and that board profile is very different from a CV. You've really got to focus on those elements.
The skills and the values you'll bring as a board colleague, as opposed to a really skilled executive.
Well, one of the biggest national company directors told me the way he gets board gigs, he sits at the chairman's lounge, Qantas, and he's got no flight to go on, right? But he just sits there, and they come up to him, John, I'm just thinking about it. I need to talk to you about a board role.
Okay, so that's not the real world, though.
No.
For the rest of us, we're out there doing a bit more to have that happen. That would be an example of privilege as well.
That's true. That's true privilege. What's the biggest mistake you've made, or the regret that you have, that you've learned the most from?
Oh my God, we have not got ours. Look, I'm always making mistakes, and the frustrating ones are the ones you make over and over and over again. But I definitely think it goes back to what I've learnt about myself. I think I have been too trusting in some occasions, or wanting, you really want, if you're blinded by optimism, even if you can, all your red flags are going off and everything tells you that this is, going down a path. I'm much better now at listening to that. I think, if I think back earlier in my career, you're really hoping that things will go differently. So I'm a lot better at that now.
Good.
Yeah.
And we call this series Game Changers. Now, first, do you consider yourself a game changer?
Well,
and
there's
why
no
do you
way
do
I'm
it?
going to say yes, because I mean, we're Australian. we cannot possibly say that. But I do think every leader should be a game changer. If we're not trying to change things for the better, then what are we doing? So I would like to think I'm a game changer. That's for others to judge, though, and I really encourage all of us to want to aspire to that.
And what's on the horizon for you? Just give us. Can you share any plans that you may have?
No, my husband's here and he'll go, what? You didn't you told me you were just going to, take it easy. So they're the ones for after. There's lots of there's always so many exciting opportunities. So some of my challenge is learning to say no. Right. But I love writing. So as a personal hobby, I love writing. So I'm back in the archives doing some research at the moment for my next book. But that's a real personal passion hobby. Work-wise, there's always sort of new things. Nothing which I can give you a scoop on right now, though.
Can you give us a feel for the book you might be writing? Give us an
well,
understanding of the theme or direction.
Yeah. So it's my first degree was in history, and I did an honours year, and that was involved going into the archives as well. So I really love that. So I'm looking at the story of a couple of women that haven't been told before in Australian history, and they're just phenomenal. So that's something that I'm really interested in at the moment. Yeah.
We might talk to you about the Queensland Business Leaders Hall of Fame.
Yes.
There may be individuals that you're about to
Yes, well,
uncover.
convenient. I wish they were Queensland women, because it would make the archives here, not in Sydney. But
Okay,
unfortunately, I have to keep hauling myself to the Mitchell Library. But yeah, they're those kind of women. Which
Right,
is
good,
great.
good. Now, building resilience is one of the key pillars of leadership. Just can you give us some of the experiences in your career where you understood the power of resilience, because you exude a capacity for resilience, the building of resilience throughout your career?
Yeah, well, I think you learn it. Every time you're knocked down, in afterwards you can think, oh, that was really great, because it's added resilience. At the time, you don't feel that. I think I am strong person, but I'm not a tough person. So I am strong because I've dealt with a lot of stuff, and you know, it's been really tough, and I've survived it. But I know I'm not someone who is tough in that my nature is much more empathetic, and I don't like confrontation, and you know, I don't seek out, you know, there's some people I think that succeed by really seeking out pushing people to the side and going that way. I'd rather not succeed if that was the case. So I guess I focus on staying strong, but you can only do that with people around you who remind you of that sometimes. You know, there's plenty of times I forget that I'm strong, and you do get through it, and it's yet another layer of resilience for next time.
Now, it's still very early days for you, but what would you want the headline of your life to be?
Well, I don't think it's going to be that I drove around Australia 17 times. You know, something as simple as she did what she could. I think, you know, that to me says a lot. You know, you're trying a lot, you're doing as much as you can, you're living a full life. I want to do what I can for others, I want to do what I can to push myself. So I like this idea of, you know, if I die and I've done what I could, died happy and loved, then, you know, I'll be pretty pleased.
That's lovely. Now, questions from the audience. We do have roving mics, so please, if you have a question, please, and the lights are about the right level too. There's a question here. Thank you very much. And please put up your hand if there's another question that you'd like to raise. Thanks for that.
Thank you, Kirstin. My question centres around, you've mentioned a couple of times your optimism, and as a optimist, eternal myself,
Yay, the optimist.
and a strong person and someone who can work through strategies and all that kind of stuff, what I'm keen to hear from you are your non-negotiables.
Yeah.
Good question.
That is a good question, because often you discover them when you're confronted with them as well. It's hard to, and you know, so I was rung about one board once. I'll get onto values, but I know what my limit is with boards. And the headhunter said, oh, you know, you're travelling overseas and you'll get paid all this money. And I'm thinking, great, there's going to be a catch. And it was a cigarette company. So that was a very clear non-negotiable for me, and apologies to the smokers. But in terms of my own non-negotiables, now that I get the opportunity to look at what boards I might want to join, I think it's the values of the people I would have to sit around the table with are the most important. And then when I'm assessing that, it's thinking about how they treat other people and whether they're respectful of other people, whether I feel that they're honest and ethical. Now, that's interesting anyway, because everyone's ethics are different, but it has to be aligned with my values and my ethics and my morals. And I think there are just clear lines in the sand where you do need to take a stand. And often no one will know you've done that, but you need to know that you've done that. And I look back and think they're my sort of hard lines. Yeah.
Another question? Right here. Thank you. Do you have the microphone there? Right there. Thanks, Nat.
It's like pass the parcel.
Thank you. Kirstin, going on from that, question is, how do you know when to move on? Like, it's not always a decision that is easy to make. It's not always a line in the sand.
Yep.
How have you made that decision?
Oh, lots of sleepless nights and 4 a.m. My real measure of when something's got to change is I'll wake up at 4 o'clock and it's like clockwork, and that then tells me something's not right. And if I'm in a situation that I just know, first of all, you just know, you do know, but I think you try and silence it for a while and think, oh no, I can fix it here, or I can fix it there, or if we try and make the situation better this way. But then there comes a point where I think you realise that it's important for your own well-being and moral line and ethical line that you need to make the change. And it is difficult. I mean, there's nothing more difficult than having to sort of step outside the norm. But yeah, if I'm having a few 4 a.m. wake-ups, then I know something's wrong, and then you just have to act. And everyone would know that sense of relief you feel when you actually do it. And given I know that will be how it feels, I sort of plough through.
Kirstin, just one thing you mentioned earlier too, I just want to come back to. It's unusual for senior leaders to have this active social media profile, yet you've been very active on major platforms like Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and LinkedIn for many years. Just give us the advantages or pitfalls that you've experienced from having a public profile online.
Well, I think there's way more advantages than pitfalls, but there are major pitfalls if you get it wrong. So I really encourage, if you are a leader and you're thinking, oh, Twitter's just for, lunch or whatever, that's so 10 years ago. It really is, social media is where your employees are, it's where your communities are, it's where your stakeholders are. Pick the right platforms or do all of them. But it is important to be there because you're hearing the conversations that are going on about your industry and about you perhaps, or about your organisation. And if you're not there, the conversations are still happening. You're just sort of over there in under a mushroom. So I do think it's important to be there. If you're there though, you have to be really aware that you need to be a leader in that space as well. And things, if you were to tweet something you wouldn't say in this kind of a forum, then you're likely to have something go wrong. So I've, touch wood, been very fortunate because I'm just mindful that I don't say anything publicly, whether it's in a forum like this or on any social media, that could be misinterpreted or that doesn't align with my values. So I tend to be really positive. It tends, celebrating women was just a natural extension because I'll always find ways to celebrate what other people are doing. And it's remarkable how powerful it can be and how many opportunities come from embracing social media. So as I said, if you're on there, find me. And it's a great way to network and to be at events that you might not be at physically, like tonight.
Question? Right here or up? Yep.
Kirstin, could you talk about the board's role in changing company culture, particularly in light of the Hayne Commission?
Why, yes, I can. Do you know, and Ravina Xavier's here, who's the Dean of the Business School, and I did my PhD in the board's role in corporate culture about 5 years ago, and it wasn't particularly of interest to anyone, but suddenly now I get to talk about it, which is great. Well, I think they're crucial. They definitely set the tone, and they need to oversee the tone, but they're not there every day. It's the CEO and the executive team that are really the ones who are most critical. But it's up to the boards to be observing what culture is being created. And that can be difficult because you're there infrequently, and so there's a whole range of ways I won't go into that. I think boards need to have a good antenna for culture. Nothing that came out of Hayne is surprising if you understand organisational culture, and I think an idea that we need to talk a lot more about as leaders is creating an environment that's psychologically safe is the term, so people can speak up if they see breaches or they see something without fear, and there's a no blame culture, or if you accidentally or you inadvertently have a breach, you can go and say, look, this is what's happened, without fear of reprisal. That's a psychologically safe workplace. And so I think boards play a crucial role, but they're not the ones who are actually there every day. They need to be overseeing what the leadership team is doing around culture.
Just on that point too, boards are now dealing with social pressures. They're dealing with a social licence really to operate. And the range of social issues the boards are expected, or companies are expected to take a public stance on. How do you feel about the way this is heading and the different responses, different obligations that come into play?
Did you know what tomorrow I'm talking about? Trust and purpose, and exactly this idea of CEO activism. You might have heard that term. So it's more CEOs being, whether it was around marriage equality or modern slavery, which Twiggy Forrest did. I think boards need to be thinking about what the purpose, with their CEOs, the purpose of a company is beyond profit, because profit in and of itself isn't a purpose. It may have been in the past, but we now know that something like 70% of millennials, and millennials now make up more than a third of our workforce, want to work in places that their purpose is to make life better, not about profit. So I do think it's important that you have a voice. It's not a voice on every issue though, and that's not going to be right for every company. And there's definitely a tension there between if you've got sponsors and stakeholders and shareholders who don't want you to have a voice around that, how you manage that.
That's right.
But I don't think it's insurmountable.
No.
It's more finding the right issue for your business.
Well, it's interesting. I'm dealing with a bunch of CEOs in the CEO Institute, and I've come to them and said, I need to hear your purpose, your organisation's purpose. What is the why? Not the what or the how, but what's the why? Because that's what resonates.
Yeah.
And the value proposition that comes out of a better understanding of the true purpose.
And saying your purpose is to make more money for shareholders or whoever, it just is not motivating for staff. But that should be the outcome. That will be the outcome if you get everything else right. So I think it's just thinking about it a bit differently.
Yep. Another question. There's a question right at the back there. Thank you. Right at the back.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed listening to your talk, and I was very struck at the beginning. You were introduced as the ducks of your year, and I imagine many people would have thought you were going to go on and have a glittering career in the military, not least of which I imagine many of the more senior officers down at ADFA. So bearing in mind what the question was 2 questions ago, why did you leave the military? And then thinking about the last question and thinking about board culture and so forth, have you been asked to go back and comment in your role as a civilian?
Yes. Well, firstly, I'll answer the second one first. I have gone back and spoken with the military. I think they've discovered in recent years I'm an alumni of ADFA, so I now get brought back a bit. Yeah, it's funny, when I left, you have to do however many years you were educated for +1 is called the return of service, and that's what I ended up doing because I'd started studying law at QUT and I was set on being a lawyer, and I wanted to practice law, and there just was no opportunities at that time to do that in the military. And I guess I hadn't seen myself as a career military officer. I loved the opportunities it gave me at such a young age, particularly for leadership experiences and travelling the world. Everything the ad says is true. But it wasn't where I saw myself going full time. But I certainly didn't leave for cultural reasons myself. I think back then they had much more inflexible working arrangements, so you were posted every few years. And so if you chose, to get married to a serving member or to have children, it became quite logistically difficult. And by that stage, we were quite settled in Brisbane, and so that's how that worked out. So, yeah, it's interesting you should ask, but I certainly do try and assist, and I'm really loyal. I'm a very loyal person anyway, and so feel great loyalty to the military and the opportunities that they gave me at that time.
Another question? Right at the back. You've put your hand up about 10 times. I need to get to you.
You talk about your life being very eventful and you're living a full life. I'm curious to hear how you balance that with being a mother and what advice you would give to your daughters to follow suit.
Well, I can look at one of them. She should probably be up here answering that. When I wrote Womankind, I wrote a chapter about, how bloody difficult it is to be a working mum, frankly, and all the guilt I felt all the time. I felt guilty as a mum, I felt guilty as an employee, and I felt guilty, as a wife. It was just a constant sort of ball of guilt. And it was quite a chapter that was, you would have thought I was the worst mother in the world, frankly. And it was lovely having my own family read it. And so that's not even, reality. Wasn't our reality. And in fact, I was at a lot of stuff. So I think as mothers, we put a lot of, and parents, sorry, I should say all parents, a lot of pressure on ourselves to be perfect. And the breakthrough for me was just deciding not to be. And there was a moment when the kids were in primary school and we had a nanny or a lady who would come and help with the kids. And one day one of them was sick at school and they rang the nanny first, and I happened to be at home and I stormed down there. I was utterly indignant. I'm the mother, ring me first. And yes, we will. And of course you can probably guess what happened. A couple of weeks later they ring me. I'm on a plane overseas. And I have to concede that, yes, perhaps ringing the nanny first, or, if my husband's away or whatever, is a better plan. And it was just deciding that the guilt was doing nothing except eating me up. The kids were perfectly happy and balanced and loving and wonderful. And I think it's being a bit kind on yourself and getting the support. So there's some really practical things. You need lots of support. You need a wonderful husband who considers parenting equally, or a partner. And I was really fortunate to have that. And I think if you can sort of somehow grapple it all through, I've got about 1 term left, Zoe, of being a parent of school-age children. Yes. So one's at university, one's about to finish, and yeah, then you can breathe. So I don't know how many years you've got left. So there is no easy answer, but women supporting women, I mean, find the other women, it takes a village, all of that.
Is there a last question from the audience? Any last question? Right down here, Nat, if you could. Thank you. Just right here. Thanks.
So as someone who's sort of just starting their career, how important is it to have a mentor or someone that you seek advice from? Yeah, how important do you think that is?
Huge, huge. You definitely need mentors, and I've still got my mentors from when I was at your stage in the career, so treat them with respect and love and gratitude for the time that they give you. And I now consider my mentors like a bit of a buffet, because you come to know what mentors are really good at assisting you with various things, and over time, in fact, it becomes a mutual relationship as well. But they're definitely really important, and then you would hope that your mentors will become sponsors. So you would have heard mentors and sponsors, they're different. You can have lots of mentors, but what you want, they're private relationships, and you'll talk about things and they'll give you advice in private. A sponsor is someone who's prepared to really put their own reputation on the line and say, actually, you need to go and have a look at this person because I think she's really impressive and she'd be great for that role. They're the people who will really help you exceed and progress, but not every mentor will become a sponsor. But in my view, you have to be a mentor before you become a sponsor, because they really need to know a lot about you and trust you. But certainly find them and stick with them, and you'll be really pleased with how much they can assist you.
Now, Kirstin, can you offer any parting advice for emerging business people, entrepreneurs, innovators in this audience tonight? Give us some parting advice.
Say yes. That is how I've lived my life, I think. And if you get opportunities as a small business owner or an entrepreneur, and someone has a left field suggestion and you hadn't, it wasn't in your business plan, be open to thinking about how you can actually integrate that, because you just don't know what direction it might take you off in. So I think being prepared to say yes.
Good, good. Darcy, please to thank Kirstin Ferguson.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray. I've had the pleasure of knowing Kirstin for more than a decade, and we've shared many stories, from everything from a sausage at swim club to formal events like this. And I was thinking tonight, it doesn't matter which forum I'm in, I always learn something new, and I think it's hard not to when you listen to Kirstin's story. You are always very reflective, always very open about your journey and the learnings, and also a really good mix of the celebrations and the challenges, which I think is also really important. And when I did ask Kirstin to do this for us, she responded within about 5 minutes, so you said yes. So please join me again, ladies and gentlemen, in thanking Kirstin. For those of you who'd like to revisit the conversation tonight or share it with friends or colleagues, the webcast and transcript will be available on the State Library and Queensland Business Leaders Hall of Fame websites within the next week. A special thanks to Ray Weeks for your valuable contribution again to Game Changers and all that you do for the QT Business School. Thank you. Our next Game Changers conversation will be on Tuesday the 13th of August, and it will feature Queensland's Chief Entrepreneur Leanne Kemp, also someone who has an amazing story to tell as the founder of Everledger. The tickets for this event are now available online via the State Library website. On behalf of the Governing Committee and founding partners, I'd like to again thank the sponsors of the Queensland Business Leaders Hall of Fame, The principal sponsor, Pitcher Partners, our television sponsor, Channel 7, and the major sponsors, Morgans, NAB and RACQ. Please join me in thanking them all. I'd also like to let you know that the Queensland Business Leaders Hall of Fame induction dinner will be held on Wednesday the 17th of July. This black tie event celebrates the success and achievements of Queensland's past and present business leaders, and this year we'll announce 6 new inductees into the Hall of Fame. It's always an amazing night with incredibly inspiring stories, so we'd love you to join us, and so if you haven't already secured your tickets, you can do so via the Hall of Fame website. Please join me now on the Queensland Terrace for refreshments, supported by our generous sponsors Clovelly Estate and Newstead Brewing Company. And Kirstin will be signing copies of her co-authored book, Womankind, which will be available to purchase. And it's a very good read, so I can thoroughly recommend it. Thank you everyone for coming.